Hello, I'm your host, Tony Felice, and what you're about to hear is the continuation of a story that began in memory and grief and now opens into something entirely new. In Season 1, we follow Tom Sanders, a writer suspended in sorrow, struggling to finish a book after the death of his mother. Through the hush of loss and unexpected guidance of a wise, mysterious cricket, something began to unfold. A story within a story. A Christmas tale, unlike any other. Now, in Season 2, we cross the threshold with Tom. We enter Santa Land itself. This is a fairy tale for grown-ups. A journey through snow and stillness, through magic and meaning, through the sacred language of the words we speak and the love we feel. So follow the cricket. Let your heart be still and listen, because Santa Land isn't just a story, it's a frequency. And love is the thread. And I am so glad that you're here. Welcome to Santa Land. Hello there, folks. Well, welcome back to the Santa Land podcast. It is definitely a sleepy time today because I recorded about 20 minutes without the microphone on. I didn't even know I had done that. Hey, listen, I'm so glad that you're here. Welcome back. As you know, we've been talking about Christmas ghosts. And I've had a few visitations myself. Whether imagined or real, they seem to coincide with the subject matter we're reading. Ebenezer is in the process of processing the information he is receiving. When the ghost of Christmas present shows up and he sneaks around the corner, you can sense the first meekness coming from Ebenezer. He even says, listen, I did not want to go with the other ghost, but I went on compulsion and I learned a few things. So if you have something to teach me, I'm all ears. I've learned that there is something of value here. And that's his first admission of vulnerability, the first crack in his armor. Vulnerability is not a weakness. Vulnerability is strength, as we find out. I think it's something that we all intuitively want, but we live in a society right now that can be very damaging, at least it seems. And the trick is that what we can learn from Ebenezer is that your world reflects who you are, your identity, okay? And so all he sees is, idiots everywhere. Nobody is interested in doing any kind of commerce, wasting everyone's time, etc. But he's learned that it's the small moments, right? When they're dancing, it's the braid. He visualizes her braid and her tender lips and how much he wishes he could still be there and knock those young boys down and tell them to get out of the way, because he would approach it with more reverence and more kindness and more compassion and more gratitude than he had before. He says that a single lock of hair would be worth more than anything. It would be priceless. Wow. So thinking about that may have been his first admission, really, to the ghost of Christmas past. The first chink in his armor, the vulnerability of realizing you lost your true love. And ostensibly it was because he was a miser and he was cheap, and he took those things more seriously. And there are some people in the world who do take those things so much more seriously that they don't have those deep, intimate relationships that we all strive for in our life. And Ebenezer is going to find out that he has been asking himself different questions for most of his life than he should have been asking himself. And we get to find out why. So, stand by. I'm going to dig back in. If you remember, we are standing on the steps of a bakery in the city of London, and it is Christmas present, and everyone's running around, and they have all their parcels, and they're jostling each other, and they're having a wonderful time in spite of their poverty. And they're in the middle of that conversation, and Scrooge asks the ghost of Christmas present a question about his torch. Stand by. In time, the bells ceased, and the bakers were shut up, and yet there was a genial shadowing forth of all these dinners, and the progress of their cooking, in the thawed blotch of wet above each baker's oven, where the pavement smoked, as if its stones were cooking too. "Is there a particular flavour in what you sprinkle from your torch?" asked Scrooge. "There is, my own." "Would it apply to any kind of dinner on this day?" asked Scrooge. "To any kindly given, to a poor one most." "Why to a poor one most?" asked Scrooge. "Because it needs it most." "Spirit," said Scrooge, after a moment's thought, "I wonder you, of all the beings in the many worlds about us, should desire to cramp these people's opportunities of innocent enjoyment." "Aye," cried the spirit, "you would deprive them of their means of dining every seventh day, often the only day on which they can be said to dine at all," said Scrooge. "Wouldn't you?" "Aye," cried the spirit. "You seek to close these places on the seventh day," said Scrooge, "and it comes to the same thing." "I seek," exclaimed the spirit. "Forgive me if I'm wrong. It has been done in your name, or at least in that of your family," said Scrooge. "There are some upon this earth of yours," returned the spirit, "who lay claim to know us, and who do their deeds of passion, pride, ill will, hatred, envy, bigotry, and selfishness in our name, who are as strange to us and our kith and kin as if they had never lived. Remember that, and charge their doing on themselves, not us." Scrooge promised that he would, and they went on, invisible as they had been before, into the suburbs of town. It was a remarkable quality of the ghost, which Scrooge had observed at the baker's, that notwithstanding his gigantic size, he could accommodate himself to any place with ease, and that he stood beneath a low roof quite as gracefully and like a supernatural creature as it was possible he could have done in any lofty hall. And perhaps it was the pleasure of the good spirit, in showing off his power to Scrooge, that it was his own kind, generous, hearty nature, and his sympathy with all poor men that led him straight to Scrooge's clerks. For there he went, and took Scrooge with him, holding to his robe. And on the threshold of the door, the spirit smiled, and stopped to bless Bob Cratchit's dwelling with the sprinklings of his torch. "Think of that! Bob had but 15 bob a week himself. He pocketed on Saturdays but 15 copies of his Christian name, and yet the ghost of Christmas present blessed his four-roomed house." Then uprose Mrs. Cratchit, Cratchit's wife, dressed out but poorly, in a twice-turned gown, but brave in ribbons which are cheap, and made a goodly show for 6 pence, and she laid the cloth, assisted by Belinda Cratchit, second of her daughters, also brave in the ribbons, while Master Peter Cratchit plunged a fork into the saucepan of potatoes, and getting the corners of his monstrous shirt-collar, Bob's private property conferred upon his son and heir in honor of the day, into his mouth, rejoiced to find himself so gallantly attired, and yearned to show his linen in the fashionable parks. And now 2 smaller Cratchits, a boy and a girl, came tearing in, screaming that outside the baker's they had smelt the goose, and had known it for their own, and basking in the luxurious thoughts of sage and onion, these young Cratchits danced about the table, and exalted Master Peter Cratchit to the skies, while he, proud, although his collar nearly choked him, blew the fire, until slow, the potatoes, bubbling up, knocked loudly at the saucepan lid to be let out and peeled. "Whatever has gotten to your precious father, then?" said Mrs. Cratchit. "And your brother Tiny Tim, and Martha? They're as late as Christmas Day by half an hour." "Here's Martha, mother," said a girl, appearing as she spoke. "Here's Martha, mother," cried 2 young Cratchits. "Hurrah! There's a goose, Martha! There's a goose!" "Why, bless your heart alive, my dear, how late are you?" said Mrs. Cratchit, kissing her half a dozen times and taking off her shawl and bonnet for her with an officious zeal. We'd a deal of work to finish up last night," replied the girl, "and had to clear away this morning, mother." "Well, never mind, so long as you've come," said Mrs. Cratchit. "Sit ye down before the fire, me dear, and have a warm spot of tea, Lord bless ye." No, there's father coming," cried the 2 young Cratchits, who were everywhere at once. "Hide, mother, hide!" So Martha hid herself, and in came little Bob, the father, with at least 3 feet of comforter, exclusive of the fringe hanging down before him, and his threadbare clothes darned up and brushed to look seasonable, and Tiny Tim upon his shoulder. Alas, for Tiny Tim, he bore a little crutch, and he had his limbs supported by an iron frame. "Why, where's our Martha?" cried Bob Cratchit, looking around. "Not coming," said Mrs. Cratchit. "Not coming," said Bob, with a sudden declination in his high spirits, for he had been Tim's blood horse all the way from church, and had now come home replant. "Not coming on Christmas Day?" Martha didn't like to see him disappointed, if it were only a joke, so she came out prematurely from behind the closet door and ran into his arms, while the 2 young Cratchits hustled Tiny Tim and bore him off into the wash-house that he might hear Pudding singing in the copper. "And how did Tiny Tim behave?" asked Mrs. Cratchit, when they had rallied Bob on his credulity, and Bob had hugged his daughters to his heart's content. "As good as gold," said Bob, "and better. Somehow he gets thoughtful, sitting himself so much, and he thinks the strangest things you've ever heard. He told me coming home that he hoped that people saw him in the church, because he was crippled, and it might be pleasant for them to remember upon Christmas Day who made lame beggars walk and blind men see." Bob's voice was tremulous when he told them this, and he trembled more when he said that Tiny Tim was growing strong and hearty. His active little crutch was heard upon the floor, and back came Tiny Tim before another word was spoken, escorted by his brother and sister to a stool beside the fire. And while Bob turned up his cuffs, as if, poor fellow, they were capable of being made more shabby, compounded some hot mixture in a jug with gin and lemons, and stirred it round and put it on the hob to simmer, Master Peter and the 2 ubiquitous young Cratchits went to fetch the goose, with which they soon returned in high procession. Such a bustle ensued that you might have thought that the goose, the rarest of all birds, a feathered phenomenon to which a black swan was a matter of course, and in truth it was something very like that in the house. Mrs. Cratchit made the gravy ready beforehand in a little saucepan, hissing hot. Master Peter mashed the potatoes with incredulous vigor. Miss Belinda sweetened up the applesauce. Martha dusted the hot plates. Bob took Tiny Tim beside him at a tiny corner at the table. The 2 young Cratchits set chairs for everybody, not forgetting themselves, and mounting guard upon their posts, crammed spoons into their mouths, lest they should shriek for the goose before their turn came to be helped. At last the dishes were set on, and grace was said. It was succeeded by a breathless pause, as Mrs. Cratchit, looking slowly all along the carving knife, prepared to plunge it in the breast. But when she did, and when the long-expected gush of stuffing issued forth, one murmur of delight arose around the board, and even Tiny Tim, excited by the 2 young Cratchits, beat his hand on the table with his knife and feebly cried, "Hooray!" "There never was such a goose," Bob said. He didn't believe there ever was such a goose cooked. Its tenderness and flavor, its size and cheapness, were themes of universal admiration. Eked out by applesauce and mashed potatoes, it was a sufficient dinner for the whole family. Indeed, as Mrs. Cratchit said with great delight, surveying one small atom of a bone upon the dish, they hadn't ate it all at last. Yet every one had had enough, and the youngest Cratchits in particular were steeped in sage and onion to the eyebrows. But now, the plates being changed by Miss Belinda, Mrs. Cratchit left the room alone, too nervous to bear witness, to take the pudding up and bring it in. Suppose it should not be done enough. Suppose I should break it turning out. Suppose somebody should have got over the wall backyard and stolen it while they were merry with the goose. A supposition at which the two young Cratchits became livid. All sorts of horrors were supposed. Hello! A great deal of steam. The pudding was out of the copper. A smell like a washing day. That was the cloth. A smell like an eating house and a pastry cook's next door to each other, with a laundress next door to that. That was the pudding. In half a minute Mrs. Cratchit entered, flushed, but smiling proudly with the pudding like a speckled cannonball, so hard and firm, blazing in half a quartern of ignited brandy, and belight with Christmas holly stuck into the top. Oh, what a pudding, Bob Cratchit said, and calmly, too, that he regarded it as the greatest success achieved by Mrs. Cratchit since their marriage. Mrs. Cratchit said that now the weight was off her mind, she would confess that she had her doubts about the quantity of flour. Everybody had something to say about it, but nobody said or thought it was a small pudding for a large family. It would have been flat heresy to do so, and any Cratchit would have blushed to hint at such a thing. At last the dinner was all done. The cloth was cleared, the hearth was swept, and the fire made up. The compound and the jug being tasted and considered perfect, apples and oranges were put upon the table, and a shovelful of chestnuts on the fire. Then all the Cratchit family drew round the hearth in what Bob Cratchit called a circle, meaning half a one, and at Bob Cratchit's elbow stood the family display of glass, 2 tumblers and a custard cup without a handle. These held the hot stuff from the jug, however as well golden goblets would have done, and Bob served it out with beaming looks, while the chestnuts on the fire sputtered and cracked noisily. Then Bob proposed, "A Merry Christmas to us all, my dears. God bless us." With which the family re-echoed. "God bless us, every one," said Tiny Tim, last of all. He sat very close to his father's side upon his little stool. Oh, Tim must be home. Obie's barking at the door. Stand by. He sat very close to his father's side upon his little stool. Bob held his withered little hand to his, as if he loved the child, and wished to keep him by his side, and dreaded that he might be taken from him. "Spirit," said Scrooge, with an interest he had never felt before, "tell me if Tiny Tim will live." "I see a vacant seat," replied the ghost, "in the poor chimney corner, and a crutch without an owner, carefully preserved. If these shadows remain unaltered by the future, the child will die." No, said Scrooge. "Oh, no, kind spirit, say it, say he will be spared." "If these shadows remain unaltered by the future, none other of my race," returned the ghost, "will find him here. What then? If he be like to die, he had better do it, and decrease the surplus population." Scrooge hung his head to hear his own words quoted by the spirit, and was overcome with penitence and grief. "Man," said the ghost, "if man you be in heart, not adamant, forbear that wicked cant until you have discovered what the surplus is and where it is. Will you decide what men shall live, what men shall die? It may be that in the sight of heaven you are more worthless and more less fit to live than millions like this poor man's child. Oh, God, to hear the insect on a leaf pronouncing on too much life among his hungry brothers in the dust." Scrooge bent before the ghost's rebuke, and trembling cast his eyes upon the ground. But he raised them speedily on hearing his own name. "Mr. Scrooge," said Bob, "I'll give you Mr. Scrooge, the founder of the feast." "The founder of the feast, indeed!" cried Mrs. Cratchit, reddening. "I wish I had him here. I'd give him a piece of my mind to feast upon, and I hope he'd have a good appetite for it." "My dear," said Bob, "the children, Christmas Day." It should be Christmas Day, I'm sure," said she, "on which one drinks the health of such an odious, stingy, hard, unfeeling man as Mr. Scrooge. You know he is, Robert. Nobody knows it better than you do, poor fellow." "My dear," was Bob's mild answer, "Christmas Day." I'll drink his health for your sake, and the day's," said Mrs. Cratchit. "Not for his. Long life to him. A Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. He'll be very merry and very, very happy, I've no doubt." The children drank the toast after her. It was the first of their proceedings which had no heartiness in it. Tiny Tim drank it last of all, but he didn't care twopence for it. Scrooge was the ogre of the family. The mention of his name cast a dark shadow on the party, which was not dispelled for a full 5 minutes. After it had passed away, they were 10 times merrier than before, from the mere relief of Scrooge, the baleful being done with. Bob Cratchit told them how he had a situation in his eye for Master Peter, which he would bring him in, if obtained, for a full 5 pence and 6 pence weekly. The 2 young Cratchits laughed tremendously at the idea of Peter's being a man of business, and Peter himself looked thoughtfully at the fire from between his collars, as if he were deliberating what particular investments he should favor when he came into the receipt of such a bewildering income. Martha, who was a poor apprentice at a milliner's, told them what kind of work she had to do, and how many hours she worked at a stretch, and how she meant to lie abed tomorrow morning for a good long rest. Tomorrow being a holiday, she passed at home. Also, how she had seen a countess and a lord some days before, and how the lord was much about as tall as Peter, at which Peter pulled up his collar so high that you couldn't have seen his head if you'd been there. All this time the chestnuts and the jug went round and round, and by the by they had a song about a lost child travelling in the snow from Tiny Tim, who had a plaintive little voice, and sang it very well indeed. There was nothing of high marks in this. They were not a handsome family. They were not well dressed. Their shoes were far from being waterproof. Their clothes were scanty, and Peter might have known, and very likely did, the inside of a pawnbroker's. But they were happy, grateful, pleased with one another, and contented with the time, and when they faded, it looked happier yet in the bright sprinkling of the spirit's torch at parting. Scrooge had his eye upon them, and especially on Tiny Tim, until the last. By this time it was getting dark, and snowing pretty heavily, and as Scrooge and the spirit went along the streets, the brightness of the roaring fires in kitchens, parlors, and all sorts of rooms was wonderful. Here, the flickering of the blaze showed preparations for a cozy dinner, with hot plates baking through and through before the fire, and deep red curtains, ready to be drawn to shut out the cold and darkness. There, all the children of the house were running out into the snow to meet their married sisters, brothers, cousins, uncles, aunts, and be the first to greet them. Here again were shadows on the window blinds of guests assembling, and there was a group of handsome girls, all hooded and fur-booted, and all chattering at once, tripping lightly off to some near neighbor's house, where woe upon the single man who saw them enter, artful witches, well they knew it, in a glow. But if you had judged from the number of people on their way to friendly gatherings, you might have thought that no one was at home to give them welcome when they were there, instead of every house expecting company, and piling up its fires half chimney high. Blessings on it, how the ghost exulted, how it bared its breadth of breast, and opened its capacious palm, and floated on, outpouring with a generous hand, its bright and harmless mirth on everything within its reach. The very lamplighter who ran on before, darting the dusky streets with specks of light, and who was dressed to spend the evening somewhere, laughed out loudly as the spirit passed, though little keened the lamplighter that he had any company but Christmas. And now, without a word of warning from the ghost, they stood upon a bleak and desert moor, where monstrous masses of rude stones were cast about, as though it were the burial place of giants. And water spread itself wherever it listed, or would have done so, but for the frost that held it prisoner. And nothing grew but moss and furze and coarse and rank grass. Down in the west of the setting sun, it had left a streak of fiery red, which glared upon the desolation for an instant, like a sullen eye, and frowning lower yet, was lost in the thick gloom of darkest night. "What is this place?" asked Scrooge. "A place where miners live, who labor in the bowels of the earth," returned the spirit. "But they know me. See?" A light shone from the window of a hut, and swiftly they advanced towards it. Passing through the wall of mud and stone, they found a cheerful company assembling round a glowing fire. An old man and woman, with their children and their children's children, and another generation beyond that, all decked out gaily in their holiday attire. The old man, in a voice that seldom rose above the howling of the wind upon the barren waste, was singing them a Christmas song. It had been a very old song when he was a boy, and from time to time they all joined in the chorus. So surely as they raised their voices, the old man got quite blithe and loud, and so surely as they stopped, his vigor sank again. The spirit did not tarry here, but bade Scrooge hold his robe, and passing on above the moor, sped whither. To see, to Scrooge's horror, looking back he saw the last of the land, a frightful range of rocks behind them, and his ears were deafened by the thundering of water as it rolled and roared and raged among the dreaded caverns it had worn and fiercely tried to undermine the earth. Built upon a dismal reef of sunken rocks, some league or so from shore, on which the waters chafed and dashed the wild year through, there stood a solitary lighthouse. Great heaps of seaweed clung to its base, and storm birds born of the wind, one might suppose as seaweed of the water, rose and fell about it like the waves they skimmed. But even here, two men who watched the light had made a fire that through the loophole in the thick stone wall shed out a ray of brightness on the awful sea. Joining their horny hands over the rough table at which they sat, they wished each other Merry Christmas in their can of grog, and one of them, the elder two, with a face all damaged and scarred with hard weather, as a figurehead of an old ship might be, struck up a sturdy song that was like a gale itself. Again the ghost sped on, above the black and heaving sea, on until being far away, as he told Scrooge, from any shore, they lighted on a ship. They stood behind the helmsman at the wheel, and the lookout at the bow, the officers who had the watch, dark, ghostly figures in several stations, but every man among them hummed a Christmas tune, or had a Christmas thought, or spoke below his breath to his companion of some bygone Christmas day, with homeward hopes of belonging to it. And every man on board, waking or sleeping, good or bad, had a kinder word for one another on that day than on any other day in the year, and they had shared to some extent in its festivities, and had remembered those that he had cared for at a distance, and had known that they delighted to remember him. It was a great surprise to Scrooge, while listening to the moaning of the wind and thinking what a solemn thing it was to move on through the lonely darkness over an unknown abyss, whose depths were secret, as profound as death. It was a great surprise to Scrooge, while thus engaged, to hear a hearty laugh. It was a much greater surprise to Scrooge to recognize it as his own nephew's, and to find himself in a bright, dry, gleaming room, with the spirit standing smiling by his side, and looking at that same nephew with approving affability. "Ha! Ha! Ha!" laughed Scrooge's nephew. "Ha! Ha! Ha! If you should happen, by an unlikely chance, to know a man more blessed in a laugh than Scrooge's nephew, all I can say is I should like to know him too, and introduce him to me, and I'll cultivate his acquaintance. It is a fair, even-handed, noble adjustment of things, that while there is infection in disease and sorrow, there is nothing in the world so irresistibly contagious as laughter and good humor." When Scrooge's nephew laughed in this way, holding his sides, rolling his head, and twisting his face into the most extravagant contortions, Scrooge's niece, by marriage, laughed as heartily as he, and their assembled friends, being not a bit behindhand, roared out lustily, "Ha! Ha! 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 He said that Christmas was a humbug, as I live. cried Scrooge's nephew. "He believed it, too." More shame for him, Fred," said Scrooge's niece indignantly. "Bless those women. They never do anything by halves. They are always in earnest." She was very pretty, exceedingly pretty, with a dimpled, surprising-looking, capital face, a ripe little mouth that seemed to be made to be kissed, as no doubt it was, all kinds of good little dots about her chin that melted into one another when she laughed, and the sunniest pair of eyes you ever saw in any little creature's head, although she was what you would have called provoking, you know, but satisfactory, too. Oh, perfectly satisfactory. "He's a comical old fellow," said Scrooge's nephew. "That's the truth, and not so pleasant as he might be. However, his offences carry their own punishment, and I have nothing to say against him." "I'm sure he is very rich, Fred," hinted Scrooge's niece. "At least you always tell me so." "What of that, my dear?" said Scrooge's nephew. "His wealth is of no use to him. He won't do any good with it. He doesn't make himself comfortable with it. He hasn't the satisfaction of thinking, that he is ever going to benefit from it, that us with it." "I have no patience with him," observed Scrooge's niece. Scrooge's niece's sister and all the other ladies expressed the same opinion. "Oh, I have," said Scrooge's nephew. "I am sorry for him. I couldn't be angry with him if I tried. Who suffers by his ill whims? Himself, always. Here, he takes it into his head to dislike us, and he won't come and dine with us. What's the consequence? He doesn't lose much of dinner." "Indeed, I think he loses a very good dinner," interrupted Scrooge's niece. Everybody else said the same, and they must be allowed to have been competent judges, because they had just had dinner, and with the dessert upon the table were clustered round the fire by lamplight. "Well, I'm very glad to hear it," said Scrooge's nephew, "because I haven't any great faith in these young housekeepers. What do you say, Topper?" Topper had clearly got his eye upon one of Scrooge's niece's sisters, for he answered that a bachelor was a wretched outcast, who had no right to express an opinion on the subject. Whereat Scrooge's niece's sister, the plump one, with the lace tucker, not the one with the roses, blushed. "Do go on, Fred," said Scrooge's niece, clapping her hands. "He never finishes what he begins to say. He's such a ridiculous fellow." Scrooge's nephew revelled in another laugh, as it was impossible to keep the infection off, though the plump sister tried hard to do it with aromatic vinegar. His example was unanimously followed. "I was only going to say," said Scrooge's nephew, "that the consequence of his taking a dislike to us and not making merry with us is, as I think, that he loses some pleasant moments, which could do him no harm. I'm sure he loses pleasanter companions than he can find in his own thoughts, either in his mouldy old office or his dusty chambers. I mean to give him the same chance every year, whether he likes it or not, for I pity him. He may rail at Christmas till he dies, but you can't help thinking better of it. I defy him. If he finds me going there in good temper, year after year, saying, 'Uncle Scrooge, how are you?' if only to put him on vein to leave his poor clerk £50, then that's something, and I think I shook him yesterday." It was their turn to laugh now, at the notion of his shaking Scrooge. But being thoroughly good-natured, and not much caring what they laughed at, so that they could laugh at any rate, he encouraged them in their merriment, and passed the bottle joyously. After tea they had some music, for they were a musical family, and knew what they were when they sung a glee or catch. I can assure you, especially Topper, who would growl away in the bass like a good one, and never swell the large veins in his forehead, or get red in the face over it. Scrooge's niece played well upon the harp, and played among other tunes a simple little air, a mere nothing, you might learn to whistle it in 2 minutes, which had been familiar to the child who had fetched Scrooge from the boarding school, as he had been reminded by the ghost of Christmas past. When this strain of music sounded, all the things the ghost had shown him came up in his mind. He softened more and more. Scrooge thought that if he could have listened often so many years ago, he might have cultivated the kind of life for his own happiness, with his own hands, without resorting to the sexton's spade that buried Jacob Marley. But they didn't devote the whole evening to music. After a while, they played at forfeits, for it is good to be children sometimes, and never better at Christmas, when its mighty founder was a child himself. Stop! There was first a game at Blind Man's Bluff. Of course there was. And I no more believe Tapa was really blind than I believe he had eyes in his boots. My opinion is that it was a done thing between him and Scrooge's nephew, and that the ghost of Christmas present knew it. The way he went after that plump sister in the lace tucker was an outrage on the credulity of human nature, knocking down the fire irons, tumbling over the chairs, bumping up against the piano, smothering himself amongst the curtains. Wherever she went, there he was. He always knew where the plump sister was. He wouldn't catch anybody else. If you had fallen up against him, as some of them did on purpose, he would have made a feint of endeavoring to seize you, which would have been an affront to your understanding, and would have instantly have sidled off in the direction of the plump sister. She often cried out that it wasn't fair, and it really wasn't. But then, at last, he caught her, when in spite of her silken rustlings and her rapid flutterings past him, he got her into a corner, whence there was no escape. Then his conduct was most execrable. For his pretending not to know her, his pretending that it was necessary to touch her head-dress, and further to assure himself of her identity by pressing a certain ring upon her finger, and a certain chain about her neck, was vile, monstrous. No doubt she told him her opinion of it, when, another blind man being in office, they were so very confidential together behind the curtains. Scrooge's niece was not one of the Blind Man's Bluff party, but was made comfortable with a large chair and a footstool in a snug corner where the ghost and Scrooge were close behind her. But she joined in the forfeits, and loved to admiration with all the letters of the alphabet. Likewise at the game of how, when, and where, she was very great, and to the secret joy of Scrooge's nephew, beat her sisters hollow. Though they were sharp girls too, as Tapa could have told you. There might have been 20 people there, young and old, but they all played, and so they did. Scrooge, for wholly forgetting in the interest in what was going on that his voice made no sound in their ears, he sometimes came out with his guess quite loud, and very often guessed right too, for the sharpness, needle, best Whitechapel warranted to not cut in the eye, was not sharper than Scrooge, blunt as he took it in the head to be. The ghost was greatly pleased to find him with this mood, and looked upon him with such favor that he begged like a boy to be allowed to stay until the guests departed. But this, the spirit said, could not be done. Here is a new game, said Scrooge. 1/2 hour, spirit. Only one. It was a game called Yes and No, where Scrooge's nephew had to think of something, and the rest must find out what. He only answered to the questions yes or no, as the case was. The brisk fire of questioning to which he was exposed elicited from him that he was thinking of an animal, a live animal, rather a disagreeable animal, a savage animal, an animal that growled and grunted sometimes, and talked sometimes, and lived in London, and walked about the streets, and wasn't made a show of, and wasn't led by anybody, and didn't live in a menagerie, and was never killed in a market, and was not a horse, or an ass, or a cow, or a bull, or a tiger, or a dog, or a pig, or a cat, or a bear. At every fresh question that was put to him, this nephew burst into a fresh roar of laughter, and was so inexpressibly tickled that he was obliged to get up off the sofa and stamp. At last, the plump sister, falling into a similar state, cried out, "I have found it out! I know what it is! Fred, I know what it is!" "What is it?" called Fred. "It's your Uncle Scrooge!" Which it certainly was. Admiration was the universal sentiment, though some objected that the reply to "Is it a bear?" ought to have been yes, inasmuch as an answer in the negative was sufficient to have diverted their thoughts from Mr. Scrooge, supposing they had ever had any tendency that way. "He has given us plenty of merriment, I am sure," said Fred, "and it would be ungrateful not to drink his health. Here's a glass of mulled wine. ready to our hand at the moment, and I say, Uncle Scrooge. Well, Uncle Scrooge, they cried. A Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year to the old man, whatever he is, said Scrooge's nephew. He wouldn't take it from me, but he may have it, nevertheless, Uncle Scrooge. Uncle Scrooge had imperceptibly become so gay and light of heart that he would have pledged the unconscious company in return, and thanked him in an inaudible speech, if the ghost had given him time. But the whole scene passed off in the breath of the last words spoken by his nephew, and he and the spirit were again upon their travels. Much they saw, and far they went, and many homes they visited, but always with a happy end. The spirit stood beside sick beds, and they were cheerful, on foreign lands, and they were close at home, by struggling men, and they were patient in their greater hope, by poverty, and it was rich. In almshouse, hospital, and goal, in misery, every refuge where vain man in his little brief authority had not made fast the door and barred the spirit out, he left his blessing and taught Scrooge his precepts. It was a long night, if it were only a night, but Scrooge had his doubts of this, because the Christmas holidays appeared to be condensed into a space of time they passed together. It was strange, too, that while Scrooge remained unaltered in his outward form, the ghost grew older, clearly older. Scrooge had observed this change, but never spoke of it until they left Children's Twelfth Night party, when, looking at the spirit as they stood together in an open place, he noticed that its hair was gray. "Are spirits' lives so short?" asked Scrooge. "My life upon this globe is very brief," replied the ghost. "It ends tonight." "Tonight?" cried Scrooge. "Tonight, at midnight. Hark, the time is drawing near." The chimes were ringing, the 11:15 at the moment. "Forgive me if I am not justified in what I ask," said Scrooge, looking intently at the spirit's robe, "but I see something strange, and not belonging to yourself, protruding from your skirts. Is it a foot or a claw?" "It might be a claw, for the flesh there is upon it," was the spirit's sorrowful reply. "Look here." From the folding of its robes, it brought out 2 children, wretched, abject, frightful, hideous, miserable. They knelt down at its feet and clung upon the outside of its garment. "Oh, man, look here! Look down here!" exclaimed the ghost. They were a boy and a girl, yellow, meager, ragged, scowling, wolfish, but prostrate too in their humility, where graceful youth should have filled their features out and touched them with its freshest tints. A stale and shriveled hand like that of age had pinched and twisted them and pulled them into shreds. Where angels might have sat enthroned, devils lurked and glared out menacingly. No change, no degradation, no perversion of humanity in any grade, through all the mysteries of wonderful creation, has monsters half so horrible and dread. Scrooge stared back, appalled. Having them shown to him in this way, he tried to say they were fine children, but the words choked themselves rather than be party to a lie of such an enormous magnitude. "Spirit, are they yours?" Scrooge could say no more. "They are man's," said the spirit, looking down upon them, "and they cling to me, appealing from their fathers. This boy is ignorance. This girl is want. Beware of them both, and all of their degree, but most of all beware this boy, for on his brow I see written which is doom, unless the writing be erased." "Deny it," cried the spirit, stretching out his hand towards the city. "Slander those who tell it ye. Admit it for your factious purposes, and make it worse, and bide the end. Have they no refuge or resource? Cried Scrooge. Are there no prisons? Asked the spirit, turning on him for the last time with his own words. Are there no workhouses? The bell struck 12. Scrooge looked about him for the ghost and saw it not. As the last stroke ceased to vibrate, he remembered the prediction of old Jacob Marley, and, lifting up his eyes, beheld a solemn phantom, draped and hooded, and coming like a mist along the ground towards him. Okay, so that's tonight. This is the second time I've done it, and I did that straight through. I had a few mistakes, but we had a bit of a disaster. For some reason, the last recording had static all over it. I was heartbroken, but not, because these things happen, and the show must go on. So I re-recorded it, and I want to recap a couple things here. Let me think. One thing to note, I think, importantly, that Scrooge is recognizing is that it doesn't matter how bleak someone's circumstances are, they can still have the Christmas spirit. Christmas present lives inside them. No matter whether they're on a ship or on some crazy lighthouse covered with seaweed, birds flying around, some desert moor where people are starving but have a song in their heart. And then we arrive at his nephews, right? And we see that the people there have a choice, an extended choice, and the scene is sort of multi-layered, because one, it's showing that merriment spans class. Right? It shows how beautiful it can be when you have money and you have all this wealth around you. The next layer is, what do you choose? Are you going to be a negative person, or are you going to be a positive person? And these are the questions we're asking of Scrooge, that Scrooge is most likely asking of himself. Who the F am I? Right? And am I redeemable? Because he's already demonstrated vulnerability, and which is an incredible thing to do overnight. I think there's also a secret here in this book too, and that is that you can change overnight. You don't have to take another class, go to another thing, do another seminar, pay for another workshop, read another book, do more yoga, pray more. Those things are so important, but you get to a place where you realize that it's really your mindset. What are you choosing? Moment to moment. Are you upset? Are you happy? Like I think we said last time, happy doesn't suck. Happy never sucks. So Scrooge is struggling with those questions of identity, but he feels the logic of it, because he's a very analytical guy, right? So he's weighing the consequence, right? He's actually doing the math in his head. Am I going to benefit greater overall by changing, or am I going to stay where I'm at and potentially end up like Jacob Marley, right? Because he doesn't want that. So he has only one choice, and he's examining, who am I going to be when I make that choice? I think that's what the dream tried to tell me this morning. And it's why I went back to bed and got some rest. It's because I was starting my day as the wrong person. And maybe it was my fault. Maybe I went to bed late. I don't remember what the circumstances were. I think I'm off because it's the holidays, and so I'm not sticking to my sleep schedule. And neither is Scrooge sticking to his sleep schedule here. I'd love your thoughts. Put your comments below or send me an email. I always love to hear from folks. And I do appreciate you being here. I hope I'm doing an okay job with the with the accents and the characters. I am reading this live. I'm not editing it unless I really, really screw up. So you get to hear me go through it as I would. It's the first time I've read this content ever, and today I did read this part second, but it is a mouthful, as you can see, as you can hear rather, and I can see. And there are no quotation marks. Very rare, very few. Often characters are speaking within the narrator describing, and so that's pretty challenging. So I hope I did okay with that. As always, you can find me here on all your favorite podcast places, and please like and subscribe. Well, I don't know if you can like and subscribe, but you can on YouTube. And so I'd like to drive some traffic to YouTube as well, if possible. But anyway, Merry Christmas, everybody. It's December 27th, and I am so grateful, and I love you. Take care.